The first sign of the end wasn't the shaped charge that blew the safe house door clean off its reinforced titanium hinges. It wasn't the brittle, crystalline fracture of shearing bolts that sounded like the sky ripping in two. It wasn't the percussive, deafening crump-thump of the Zarya 3 flashbangs that followed, nor the brutal, efficient clatter of combat boots on the worn parquet floor. The first sign, the true and final harbinger of their utter, comprehensive ruin, was the borscht. It was a deep, rich, almost impossibly crimson borscht, the color of a cardinal's robe simmering on a sleek, black Gaggenau induction stovetop. Its earthy, sweet scent of beets, dill, and a phantom hint of smoked paprika, a spice Maya had sourced at great personal risk from a Georgian black market contact, filled the small, overheated kitchen of apartment 4B on Kutuzovsky Prospect. The aroma was a defiant act of domesticity, a fragrant rebellion of home in the very heart of the enemy's capital. Maya Singh, whose quiet intensity and an almost preternatural intuition for the subtle rhythms of a hostile city made her the Moscow station's sharpest case officer, was stirring it with a practiced, steady hand. Her movements were economical and precise, the heavy wooden spoon circling the pot in a hypnotic, meditative rhythm. She was imposing order on a chaotic world, one slow circle at a time. She believed in celebrating a win, not with champagne and noise, but with quiet ritual, a shared meal to mark the perilous passage from danger to safety. And tonight was the win, the culmination of 3 years of their collective lives, a lifetime of risk compressed into a single, triumphant evening. The borscht was her mother's recipe, a thread of connection to a world of sun-drenched kitchens in suburban Virginia. A world of mundane worries that felt 1,000,000 miles and 1,000 years away. Across the small, sparsely furnished living area, Ben Carter, whose knuckles were a permanent roadmap of pale, ridged scars, was field stripping his Sig Sauer P226 Legion. He worked with the quiet, meditative focus of a monk at prayer, each metallic slide and click a familiar liturgy. One scar, a puckered white line across his right thumb, was from a jammed M249 SAW in the Korengal Valley. Another, a starburst on his left index knuckle, was from a close-quarters argument in a Fallujah market. The pistol, with its custom G10 grips that felt tacky and warm in his palm, and its flat-faced trigger that broke as cleanly as a shard of ice, was an extension of his will, a tool he understood more intimately than he understood most people. The scent of Hoppa's No. 9 gun oil, sharp and acridly chemical, cut through the comforting aroma of the soup, a perfect olfactory metaphor for their existence. The warmth of life perpetually undercut by the cold scent of death. It was a smell he associated not with violence, but with its prevention. It was the smell of preparation, his own personal sacrament. Leo Vance, the Moscow station chief, watched them both from a worn leather armchair by the window. The condensation from his glass of ice-cold Stolichnaya Elit vodka left a perfect shimmering circle on the wooden sill. He didn't touch the drink, merely held it. The profound chill of the glass, a grounding sensation in his palm, a tiny shard of the Siberian winter he held, as a reminder to stay sharp. Outside, the frigid Moscow wind, a relentless beast howling in from the great eastern plains, battered the triple-paned glass. It was a physical presence, a constant, abrasive pressure on the building, seeking any crack, any weakness. But inside, there was a fragile pocket of warmth and deceptive calm. The three of them, a ghost trinity in the very den of the bear, waiting for the final piece of their masterpiece to click into place. Leo traced the frost patterns on the window pane with a blunt finger, his mind not on the celebration, but on the 100 things that could still go wrong. He was a creature of contingencies. His optimism surgically removed years ago in a dusty back alley in Tehran, where he'd watched a good man named Farid bleed out because of a moment of complacency. A repeated pattern, a single fatal assumption. He had sworn on Farid's memory never to make that mistake again. The first sign was the sudden, almost imperceptible cooling of that borscht. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was a cessation, an abrupt halt. The faint, high-frequency 24 kilohertz hum of the induction stovetop vanished into an absolute silence. The soft yellow glow of the overhead light, a cheap fixture from the Brezhnev era whose gentle buzzing had become part of the room's ambient noise, flickered once, twice, and then the apartment plunged into a thick, syrupy darkness. A planned power outage, a city grid failure, entirely plausible in this sprawling, decaying metropolis. Except in their world, plausible was just another word for hostile. In the sudden, profound blackness, the city's ambient sodium vapor glow painted the room in stark shades of gray and bruised orange, filtering through the windows and casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the walls like living things. No one spoke. No one gasped. Their training was a physical thing, an instinct that clamped down on surprise, strangling it in its crib. The silence was absolute, a held breath stretching for an eternity. 3 years of planning, of meticulously building legends layer by layer, of running soul-crushing surveillance detection routes through the frozen, exhaust-choked Moscow streets. It had all led to this single evening, to the encrypted data drive, a solid-state device no bigger than a thumb, now nestled in a shielded exfiltration unit. The unit, a bespoke piece of bleeding-edge tech from a lab in Langley codenamed Nightshade, was humming silently as it uploaded the crown jewels of the SVR's hypersonic missile program. It was a pencil-thin stream of data, chopped into 1 million packets, encrypted with a constantly shifting, quantum-resistant AES-256 cipher, and fired via a tight-beam satellite link at a specific moving point in the geosynchronous orbit. A designated slot codenamed Tango 7, a digital needle in a cosmic haystack. The asset codenamed Orion was gone. Colonel Anatoly Fedorov of the SVR had been spirited away an hour ago through a Byzantine route involving a diplomatic pouch immune to search, a commercial laundry truck servicing the Finnish embassy, and a private flight to Helsinki chartered by a fictitious Swedish mining corporation. His part in the drama was complete. All that was left was the upload, the celebratory dinner that would never be eaten, and the quiet professional fade back into the city's endless, grinding noise. Ben? Leo's voice was a low rasp, a sound like gravel on stone that cut through the silence without shattering it. He didn't need to say more. The single word was a command, a question, and a warning all at once. Working on it. Carter's reply was a disembodied whisper from the corner of the room. The soft, frantic tap of his fingers on the Gorilla Glass of a ruggedized Panasonic toughpad was the only sound. The tablet was on its own power, a closed-loop system connected to their own isolated network. Its screen, a dim rectangle of greenish, spectral light, illuminating the hard, angular lines of his face. He was checking the feeds from the button cameras they'd secreted in the hallway, the stairwell, and overlooking the street. These weren't commercial devices. They were agency spec, powered by micro batteries designed to last for exactly 72 hours in a crisis scenario. Their tiny pinhole lenses disguised as screwheads and water stains. Maya, red protocol on your mark, Leo said, his eyes not leaving the window. He was scanning the imposing Stalinist-era building across the prospect, tracing its lines, looking for the telltale glint of optics, for the silhouettes of men that didn't belong, for any deviation from the baseline he had memorized over 3 years of painstaking observation. "Standing by," she whispered back from the kitchen's darkness. The red protocol was their doomsday button, their final act of defiance. 2 compact thermite charges, secured with high-temperature epoxy, one to the nightshade uplink device, the other to their primary server tower, hidden in a false wall behind the pantry. At her command, initiated from her own tablet via a triple-encrypted frequency-hopping signal in the 2.4 GHz band, they would ignite at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They would turn terabytes of classified data, mission logs, and $250,000 of bespoke electronics into a molten, unsalvageable slag heap in under 3 seconds. It was a last resort, a brutal, final admission of catastrophic failure. The mission to cultivate Orion had been a masterclass in patience, a textbook case study that would be taught at the farm for decades if they lived to write the report. Colonel Anatoly Fedorov was not a man with grand ideological grievances against the motherland. He was a man drowning, slowly and pathetically, in gambling debts and a corrosive resentment for a system that had passed him over for promotion one too many times. He hadn't been recruited. He had been meticulously, painstakingly nudged. For a year, the agency had used cutouts and third-party actors to subtly feed his addiction, to place him in circles where whispers of Western money were commonplace. They had engineered a scenario where a beautiful, raven-haired croupier at a private poker game in a dacha outside Moscow, a woman on the agency payroll who had spent 6 months learning Fedorov's specific tells, had sympathized with his catastrophic losses and suggested a friend who helped respected men with short-term liquidity problems. They made him believe that reaching out was his own brilliant, desperate idea. Their first physical contact wasn't in a smoky bar or a deserted park bench. It was a brush pass in the cavernous, opulent gum department store during the height of the chaotic Christmas shopping season. Under the gaze of 1,000 glittering lights, the air was thick with the scent of pine, expensive perfume, and wet wool. Maya, under the legend of Hélène Dubois, a chic Parisian textile buyer with a penchant for Russian sable, had walked past him near the Grand Central Fountain. Her calfskin leather shopping bag grazed his briefcase for less than half a second. In that fleeting, imperceptible contact, a microdot containing a one-time pad encryption key and communication instructions had been transferred via a small patch of static-charged adhesive on the bag's corner. It was achingly old-school tradecraft, elegant and virtually undetectable. The FSB, Russia's Federal Security Service, looked for radio signals, for satellite phones, for digital footprints. They didn't look for a piece of lint on a briefcase. From there, the communication had been sterile, conducted through a series of dead drops that were never used twice. One was a hollowed-out bolt on the underside of the Bolshoi-Kameny Bridge. Maya remembered the feel of the metal, so cold it seemed to burn her fingertips even through her insulated gloves, as the dark, icy waters of the Moskva River swirled below, and her breath fogged in the frigid air. Another was a magnetic key case, tucked deep inside a rusted, forgotten drainpipe in a remote corner of Gorky Park. The air smelling of damp earth and snow, the silence broken only by the crunch of her boots. Each drop contained 2 things: a small, vacuum-sealed package of crisp 500 euro notes for Orion, and a new, single-use encrypted messaging device for his next intelligence dump. The agency never reused a method, a location, or a piece of tech. They were disciplined, methodical, and invisible. Leo had made sure of it. He would not lose another agent to sloppy work. Not in Moscow. The safe house itself was a fortress, disguised as a forgotten relic of the Brezhnev era. They had acquired it through 3 layers of shell corporations. The final one registered in Cyprus to a non-existent shipping magnate with a meticulously crafted, if entirely fictional, online presence. The apartment was chosen for its strategic placement. Top floor, corner unit, with a clear line of sight for the satellite uplink and only 2 potential points of entry. The door, and a shared wall with a neighboring apartment, 4C, that their shell company had also conveniently rented and kept vacant. It was their emergency exit, their oh shit hatch into a separate reality. Ben Carter had spent a month turning it into a ghost sanctuary. The door was solid steel, masked by a thin veneer of peeling faux wood laminate to match the others in the drab hall. Its frame was reinforced with titanium bars bolted directly into the building's concrete load-bearing wall. A job done over 3 nights with the low, grinding protest of a water-cooled, low RPM drill to minimize vibration and noise. The fine mist of concrete dust coating his throat. The visible locks were Medeco M3S, considered virtually unpickable. But they were secondary, mere stage dressing. The primary lock was a powerful electromagnetic seal, holding the door with 1,200 pounds of force, controlled electronically from within and powered by its own uninterruptible battery supply. The windows were triple-paned and coated with a thin, almost invisible metallic film to block laser microphones. The walls were laced with a fine mesh of fiber optics connected to a pressure sensor. Any drilling or attempt to breach the wall would snap a fiber and trigger a silent alarm. A suite of constantly sweeping TSCM, technical surveillance countermeasures, devices hidden in a gutted television set, hunted for rogue radio frequencies, sweeping a spectrum from 10 MHz to 26 GHz, searching for the telltale emissions of a hidden bug. The apartment was, in theory, a black hole in the middle of Moscow's vast electronic surveillance state. "Leo?" Carter's voice was tight, strained, the whisper imbued with a sudden, terrible gravity. "We have a problem." He didn't need to shout. The tension in those 4 words was louder than a scream. "Hallway cam is down, stairwell too. But I got a final image frame from the street-level cam before it went dark. A black Gaz Sobol van. No plates. The kind the FSB uses for snatch-and-grab jobs. And 5 men in black tack gear getting out. Full kit. Alton helmets with insectoid gleam of their visors. Looked like Alpha. The air in the room seemed to solidify, becoming thick and hard to breathe. 5 men was a team. An Alpha Group team. The Spetsnaz of the Federal Security Service. They didn't send Alpha Group to knock on a door and ask questions. They sent them to end things. Quickly, brutally, and with extreme prejudice. How? The word escaped Maya's lips, a puff of shocked disbelief in the cold air. "We ran the route. Orion was clean. We were clean. I swear it, Leo." Leo believed her. Maya's tradecraft was flawless, a combination of innate talent and obsessive discipline. She could spot a surveillance team from 6 blocks away by the subtle, unnatural synchronicity of their movements. Her surveillance detection routes, or SDRs, were works of art, meandering ballets of paranoia. She would enter a metro station at rush hour, change trains 3 times on different lines, exit from a different station 2 miles away, take a bus, then a taxi, and walk the final half-mile, all the while checking her reflection in shop windows, watching the pedestrians behind her, looking for the same face appearing in different locations, the cardinal sin of physical surveillance. If Maya said they were clean, they were clean. But the men were here. The equation didn't balance. A catastrophic variable had been introduced, and he couldn't see it. Doesn't matter how, Leo said, his voice flat and cold as the vodka in his glass. He was moving now, his body uncoiling from the chair with a fluid grace that belied his age. He crossed the room to the false wall, his hand finding a hidden magnetic latch. Time on target, Ben? From the street to our door. 90 seconds if they're quiet. 30 if they're not. They're being quiet. That was the worst part. The quiet. It meant they were professionals. It meant they believed they had the element of complete surprise. They didn't know that Carter's obsessive paranoia had extended to planting a tiny seismic sensor near the building's main power conduit in the basement. The sensor had registered the precise, metallic snip of insulated bolt cutters on the main breaker, a sound that would be lost to any normal ear, but which had triggered the instant power down alert on Carter's tough pad. That was the click they had heard. That was the cooling of the borscht. They had been given a gift of maybe a minute. In their world, a minute could be a lifetime. Leo pulled 3 go bags from the hidden compartment. Each was a compact, nondescript backpack packed with a passport under a different legend, cash in euros, dollars, and rubles, a set of titanium lockpicks, a sterile laptop, and a concealable sidearm with 2 extra magazines. Standard bug-out gear. He tossed one to Maya, one to Ben. Data status? He asked, his voice clipped. 70% uploaded, Maya reported, her fingers a blur across her own tablet, which now glowed with lines of cascading code. The core engine and guidance system schematics are through. The rest is telemetry data, test firing results. Important, but the crown jewels are safe. Scrub it, Leo commanded without hesitation. Scrub it all. Soon as it hits 71%, trigger the protocol. We leave nothing, not a bite. Copy that. A faint, almost inaudible scraping sound came from the hallway, just under the door. The sound of a fiber optic scope, a snake cam, being inserted into the gap. They were checking for booby traps, for the placement of occupants. There at the door, Ben whispered, his SIG now fully assembled. The dark, heavy cylinder of a silencer co-suppressor screwed onto its threaded barrel. He moved to the side of the entrance, flattening himself against the wall, a solid shadow in the gloom. 30 seconds, Leo estimated, his mind a flurry of cold calculations. The primary escape plan was compromised. Going out the door was suicide. The windows led to a 6-story drop onto frozen pavement. That left only one option, the adjacent apartment. The oh shit hatch. Ben, the wall, Leo ordered. Carter nodded, his jaw set. He moved to the wall that adjoined the empty safe house next door. Behind a framed print of a bleak, uninspired socialist realist painting was a section of drywall that had been carefully scored with a diamond wire saw from the inside. It was designed to be kicked through, a last-ditch exit. Beyond it, the empty apartment offered another route to a different stairwell, and hopefully to the street and precious, life-giving anonymity. Maya, status? 71%. Upload complete for the primary package. Triggering red protocol. Now. She typed a final command into her tablet, and then, following protocol, hurled it against the far wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces of glass and plastic. Simultaneously, 2 brilliant, searing flashes of white light erupted from the kitchen and the hidden server closet. A low, intense whoosh followed, and the immediate, acrid smell of burning silicon, plastic, and metal filled the air. The thermite was doing its work. The smell was the smell of failure, of a mission gone irrevocably sideways. But it was also the smell of denial. The FSB would get the agents, but they would not get their technology or their data. a small, bitter victory. The moment the thermite flashed, the hallway exploded. They had clearly been waiting for some kind of action, and the internal light show was all the trigger they needed. A shaped charge detonated against the lock mechanism, and the entire steel door blew inward, torn from its reinforced frame as if it were made of cardboard. It crashed onto the parquet floor with a deafening clang that was immediately swallowed by the sound of 2 Zarya 3 flashbangs rolling into the room. Leo and his team were prepared. They had drilled for this. They didn't look at the grenades. They squeezed their eyes shut, opened their mouths to equalize the concussive pressure, and dropped to the floor, covering their heads. The world became a pure, white, physical force, a magnesium-white sun detonating in the confines of the room. A sound that wasn't a sound, but a physical blow to the chest that vibrated through their bones. A light that burned through their eyelids, leaving dancing purple amoebas in their vision. Disorientation washed over them. A dizzying, nauseating vertigo that made the floor feel like a tilting deck in a storm. Before the piercing ringing in his ears had subsided, Leo was moving. He could hear Carter already firing, the suppressed, rhythmic hissing cough of his SIG spitting 9mm rounds toward the breach. He was firing low, disciplined 3-round bursts aimed for legs and feet, buying them seconds. Muzzle flashes from the doorway answered back, unsuppressed, deafening roars of AK-12S on full auto. Plaster, wood chips, and smoke filled the air as 5.45mm rounds tore through the apartment with vicious energy, chewing up the walls and furniture. "Go! Go now!" Carter yelled, his voice strained. He emptied his magazine, the slide locking back. In a single, fluid motion, born of 1,000 repetitions, he dropped the empty mag, slammed a fresh one into the well, and hit the slide release, continuing to lay down a disciplined, disruptive fire. He wasn't trying to win a gunfight. He was an artist of delay, a creator of time where none should exist. Leo grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her toward the escape wall. She was stumbling, still dazed from the blast. He shoved her forward. "The wall, Maya! Go!" He turned back to help Carter, drawing his own weapon, a Glock 19. He saw the first black-clad figure storm through the doorway, a heavy Vant VM ballistic shield held in front. Carter's round sparked off it uselessly. 2 more figures followed, fanning out, their movements fluid, economical, terrifyingly professional. Red laser dots from their weapons sights danced across the smoke-filled room, searching for targets. One of the dots settled on Ben Carter's chest. He grunted, a sound of surprise and sharp impact. A wet, heavy thud as 3 rounds punched through his body armor at the shoulder joint, a known weak point. The kinetic energy spun him around like a top. He went down hard, his weapon clattering on the floor. Leo's stomach turned to ice. He fired twice at the lead operator, aiming for the head just above the shield. The rounds were on target, but they ricocheted off the man's heavy Alton helmet with a sharp crack. The operator didn't even flinch. Behind him, Leo heard a splintering crash. Maya was through the wall. He had to follow. He backed away, firing, providing his own cover as he moved. The room was a chaotic hell of smoke, noise, and flying debris. He risked a glance behind him. The hole in the wall was a dark, promising maw. Freedom. He saw a flicker of movement near the hole. It wasn't Maya going through. It was another figure coming in, a 5th FSB operator. They hadn't come just through the door. They had breached the adjacent apartment as well. They had known. They had known about the escape route. The realization hit Leo with the force of a physical blow, harder than any flashbang. This wasn't a raid. It was an extermination. A perfectly planned, perfectly executed trap. Every countermeasure, every escape plan, every secret they thought was their own, had been known to the enemy. The operator emerging from the escape hatch leveled his rifle. In the same instant, the two from the front door advanced, their lasers painting Leo's chest. He saw Maya on the floor of the other apartment, a boot on her neck, her hands already being brutally zip-tied behind her back. She had run directly into their arms. It was over. 3 moves on a chessboard, and every single one was a checkmate. Leo stood there, gun in hand, in the center of the ruined apartment. The smell of borscht and thermite and cordite hung in the air, a sickening perfume of utter disaster. He looked at Ben Carter, a still dark shape bleeding out on the floor. He looked at Maya, captured, her face pressed into the dusty floor of their last hope. He looked at the 3 Alpha Group operators whose rifles were now trained on his center mass. There was a protocol for this too, the final one. When capture was imminent and escape was impossible. He was the station chief. He held the keys to the entire European network in his head. Names, locations, active operations. He could not be taken alive. His service weapon felt heavy and cold in his hand. He could raise it to his temple. A simple, clean solution. An ending. But as he looked at Maya's defiant eyes, even as a boot pressed down on her, something broke in him. The cold, calculating calculus of the professional gave way to a hot, useless rage. They had lost. He had lost. But he would not give them the satisfaction of a tidy suicide. He would not make it easy. With a deliberate, final gesture, he let the Glock clatter to the floor and slowly raised his empty hands. Let them take him. Let him see the face of the man who had beaten him. He would carry the weight of this failure, and if he ever got the chance, he would find out how. How had they been so completely, so utterly compromised? The years that followed were a gray, featureless blur, a descent into a world without color or time. The initial interrogations at the infamous Lefortovo prison were a masterclass in psychological warfare. They didn't use crude torture. They used time, isolation, sleeplessness, and a meticulous, soul-crushing pressure. His interrogator, a calm, well-spoken colonel named Ivan Morozov with soft hands and tired eyes, would offer him strong, black tea and paparazzi cigarettes. Leo, or David as you insist, we are not barbarians, Morozov said during one of their first sessions, his Russian precise and almost unaccented. We are professionals. You appreciate professionalism, I think. Let us simply talk about your work. Then they would show him high-resolution satellite photographs of his wife and daughter back in Virginia, walking their golden retriever, getting groceries at Whole Foods, blissfully unaware that he was buried in a concrete box halfway around the world. They would play him recordings of Maya's interrogations from a nearby cell, her voice strained but unbroken, subtly edited to make it sound as if she were implicating him. They never mentioned Ben Carter. In their eyes, he had simply ceased to exist, a piece removed from the board and discarded. Leo gave them nothing. His legend held firm. He was David Miller, a mid-level commercial attaché at the embassy, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, perhaps involved in some light currency speculation. He denied everything. He repeated the same lies until they became his reality. He built a fortress in his mind and lived inside it. After 2 years, they seemed to grow tired of the game. He was convicted in a secret military trial of espionage and sentenced to 25 years in a hard labor camp in the frozen wastes of Siberia. He was never traded. The agency, for its own cold, pragmatic reasons, disavowed him completely. To acknowledge him would be to acknowledge the catastrophic failure of the Moscow station. He was a ghost, a write-off. a cost of doing business in the great game. He learned to survive in the brutal ecosystem of the Gulag, IK-17 Vostok, a place where the air had the permanent taste of sulfur from the low-grade coal, and a constant, gnawing dampness seeped into the bones. His mind was kept sharp and alive by the single burning question that circled his thoughts like a starving wolf. How? The answer came 12 years later, on a damp, freezing morning that smelled of wet coal and despair. It arrived in the form of a new prisoner, Dmitry Volkov. The man was old, skeletal, his face a roadmap of regret and his hands shaking with a perpetual tremor. He was a former GRU archivist, imprisoned for selling state secrets to the Chinese. He and Leo ended up working together in the camp's squalid, steam-choked laundry, the clouds of vapor providing a thin veil of privacy. Over months, through whispers and coded phrases, they traded stories. Volkov, a man who still revered the art of intelligence, was fascinated by the legend of the American station chief who had never broken. Learning who Leo was, he finally told him a story he'd heard years ago, a legend whispered in the halls of the Lubyanka, the story of the great American failure on Kutuzovsky Prospect. The FSB hadn't followed them to the safe house. They hadn't broken Orion. They hadn't picked up their electronic signals. The truth was far simpler, far more elegant, and far more terrifying. They had been in the apartment with them from the very beginning. The shell corporation that had rented the 2 apartments had been flagged by the SVR's